around her, she felt her strength being sapped. Soon she could no longer carry her bags, so she slid them along on the snow. Her smaller bag had a pot and a kettle tied to its outside that jangled loudly with each slide. Gladys had been stumbling along for about an hour when she realized that the orange glow of cannon fire was no longer on the horizon. Even though she'd been at the front line, the thought of people being nearby had been strangely comforting. Now she was completely alone in the vast Siberian wilderness, trudging along snow-covered train tracks. Every so often, a large clump of snow slipped off a tree limb and landed with a loud thud. Gladys would stop and peer into the dark shadows of the forest and wonder whether it was the sound of a bear or a wolf nearby. Such animals were out there, and a lone woman in the forest at night was easy prey for them. Gladys began wondering whether she would actually make it back to Chita, or whether the bitter cold or a wild beast would claim her life first. But she had to make it back. She had things to do in China. God had called her there. Surely he wouldn't let her die in the snow in a Siberian forest. Slowly, Gladys shuffled on up the tracks. The hours folded one into another. Her feet became numb, and she began dragging and sliding them along, just as she did her 2 suitcases. But stubborn as she was, Gladys finally had to admit she was totally exhausted. What should she do? If she stopped, she could make herself some hot coffee and eat a stale cookie. But would she be able to go on after that? She'd heard stories of people who, when trapped in the cold and snow, had become so exhausted they calmly sat down and froze to death. Gladys was scared of that happening to her, yet she knew that if she kept going, in the end she would fall face down in the snow. Then, with nothing warm in her stomach, she would not have the energy to get up again. Finally, she could no longer resist the lure of a stale cookie and hot cup of coffee. She scooped away the snow until she felt one of the wooden railroad ties beneath it. With both hands, she took her small spirit stove from her bag, set it down on the tie, and tried to light it. Her fingers were so thick and numb that it took her 4 fumbled attempts before a yellow-blue flame finally began to glow from the stove. Gladys placed some snow into the kettle and set the kettle on the stove to melt and boil the snow. With a cookie and hot coffee inside her, Gladys felt even more tired, but she dared not sleep in this frozen wasteland. In the end, though, she gave in, but she promised herself that she would sleep for only a little while. She arranged her suitcases around herself and pulled the top of her fur coat up over her head. Then she rolled up into a ball and fell asleep. Chapter 2. Not Good Enough to be a Missionary. Her worst nightmare had come true. Gladys sat in a straight-back chair while the director of the China Inland Missionary Society's training school in London droned on. By now, she was hardly listening to what he had to say. All that needed to be said had already been said. Gladys was no longer welcome to continue her studies. She was being thrown out of the training school for failing Bible class. Her grades were not good enough for her to be a missionary, not to mention the fact that she was 27 years of age, old by the training school's standards. The director had tried to explain that the experience of the China Inland Mission had shown that it was difficult enough for quick-minded older people to learn the complex languages of China. He also tried to explain that it would be unfair to allow Gladys to continue failing classes when others could take her place and do much better. Other younger and more qualified people were waiting in line to take her place in the school. The director was a kindly man with deep blue eyes and a soft voice. He wasn't trying to hurt Gladys's feelings. He was just giving her the facts as they were. Gladys could see his point. She hadn't done well during the first 3 months of the school. But then, she'd never done well at school. She had